when, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. Those are the first two paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration goes on then, and the bulk, the middle of the document, tells all the things that the colonies felt that King George had done that broke the contract between the government and the people who were governed. It then goes on to talk about how the people of the colonies have sought for redress and how they have tried to maintain ties and appeal to the people of Great Britain. It talks about their common heritage and bonds with the people of Great Britain and how they feel like the people have let them down by allowing the despot to go on. And then it closes with this paragraph. We therefore, the representatives of the United, that's a little u, States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. I have here a reproduction of the Declaration of Independence. I'll pass this around so you can actually look at it. This is about 3/4 the size of the actual document, and this is from a printer's engraving taken in 1823 from the actual declaration that was signed. A few years ago, my wife came into the room where I was just closing a book that I had been reading. And looking at me closely, she noticed there were tears running down my cheeks. And with a look of concern on her face, she said, "What's wrong?" And I looked up and I was feeling kind of emotional. I couldn't get out a lot of words, so I just said, "He died." And the emotional loss I felt was too strong for me to say a lot more. The book was a biography of Thomas Jefferson, and it was not actually a surprise to me that he would die at the end of the book. Thomas Jefferson was 83 years old when he died on the 4th of July, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. John Adams died that same day. Thomas Jefferson died as one of the most talented people who's ever lived on this earth. And he had accomplished many things in law and politics, in music, in agriculture, in engineering. But he only wanted to be remembered for two things. And he actually drew a picture of his gravestone and put down the words he wanted to be on there. He wanted to be remembered for being the primary author of the Declaration of Independence. And he wanted to be remembered for founding the University of Virginia. I've thought many times when driving through Silicon Valley how interesting it would be to have a man like Thomas Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin or George Washington with me and talk about the things they were seeing. It would be fascinating to me to see what they would be interested in. Would it be the people, the society, the inventions? Would they be fascinated by the car we were driving in? I find that a recurring daydream of mine to think about. What if you were walking around Palo Alto or driving through Silicon Valley with Thomas Jefferson? What would the conversation be like? Now, I don't know a great deal about the University of Virginia, which Thomas Jefferson, with a little help, did found. I know that I have a few friends who attended there. I know that the Bodleys, who were in our ward for a while, live near there, and Brother Bodley teaches there. I know that my law firm recruits excellent students from the University of Virginia Law School. But about the Declaration of Independence, I have been learning a little bit ever since I was about a Cub Scout, younger than the Scouts you saw post the flag. And of course, in preparation for speaking to you, I've done a little crash study to refresh my memory. What is this document that we're passing around? Well, it's exactly what the name implies. It's a declaration of the independence of the group of people who lived in the 13 American colonies from the nation of Great Britain. It's not a law. It doesn't require us to do anything. You sometimes hear it cited in court arguments, but it doesn't have any official status as being adopted as a force of a statute or a law. It still is a remarkable document, though. And today's newspaper called it the greatest editorial ever written. It was written primarily by Thomas Jefferson. He was the lead draftsman. He was part of a committee of 5. It was composed of Thomas Jefferson, his sometimes friend and colleague, sometimes enemy, sometimes political rival, John Adams, the grand old statesman of the time, Benjamin Franklin, who was already in his 80s when the Declaration was drafted, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston. Those were the 5 who were commissioned to do the drafting. Interestingly, Robert Livingston never signed the Declaration of Independence. You'll see 56 names at the bottom. He never signed it. Jefferson was 33 years old when he was drafting the Declaration of Independence. The discussion between Adams and Jefferson about who would do the first draft is an interesting one. John Adams reports to us how that discussion went. These two were probably, I don't know all of the people who were there, but they were 2 of the brightest and best educated minds. They were both published authors on politics, well respected, even though they were some of the younger members. Adams reports that their discussion went something like this. Jefferson said, "Adams, you should do the first draft." Adams, "I will not. You should do it." Jefferson, "Oh no, why will you not? You ought to do it." Adams, "I will not." Jefferson, "Why?" Adams, "Reasons enough." Jefferson, "What can be your reasons?" Adams, "Reason first. You are a Virginian, and a Virginian ought to appear at the head of this business." Was it the leading powerful colony? Reason second, I am obnoxious. suspected, and unpopular. You are very much otherwise. Reason third, you can write 10 times better than I can. Jefferson, well, if you are decided, I will do as well as I can. Adams, very well. When you have it drawn up, we will have a meeting. So Jefferson went off. He worked in seclusion. He had rented an apartment. It was the summer in Philadelphia. I'm sure it was hot. It wasn't always hot that summer, but he worked. He wrote a draft. He then brought it back to the Committee of Five. Actually, he showed it to Adams and Franklin first because he knew that they would have the most to say. Adams wrote that he didn't remember making any changes, although there's other evidence that says he did. Adams said he looked at the parts that condemned slavery and the attacks on King George, and he thought neither one of those would survive Congress. But he didn't think it was necessary for him to make the changes because he figured other people would. And he was right. Franklin added some material, and then when the Committee of Five was satisfied, they submitted it to the Congress. It went on June 28th. Congress made another 50-some changes, and including removing the condemnation of slavery in about a total of 480 words. And then on July 2nd, 1776, while the British fleet was arriving in New York, Congress took action, and actually on the 2nd of July, Congress adopted a resolution that was proposed that the colonies declare their independence. So the resolution declaring the independence was actually passed by the Congress on July 2nd, and John Adams later predicted that July 2nd would be a great holiday. Discussions over the document went on until the 4th, and it was on the 4th of July that Congress approved the document, the Declaration of Independence, and that's why it turned out to be the 4th of July. I think a couple of people read in the newspaper this morning how many people signed on the Declaration of Independence, how many signed on the 4th of July, the Declaration. Raise your hand if you know that. How many people signed it? There are 56 signatures. Way in the back. Hank? 2. Right. John Hancock, most famous signature on there, right? Big enough that King George can read it without his glasses. And his assistant, whose last name was Thompson, I don't remember, who was also there. He had some official responsibility. So they signed. But most of them didn't sign until my wife's birthday, August 2nd, when the printer's official copy was available. And then some of them signed within a few days. Some didn't sign for weeks. A few were months. And a couple of them never signed the Declaration of Independence. It was a big risk if you think about it. If you think about signing the Declaration of Independence, these men were men of substance. They were well known. They were well respected. Many of them were wealthy. They were well educated. They were some of the leading men in all the colonies. They were scholars who were well read in the classics, in the Bible, in the philosophers of the time. Jefferson, for example, spoke 5 languages and could read 2 more. These men were putting all of that at risk. When you sign your name to a document that declares your independence from the sovereign, King George, you better be right, because if you're not, then it's called treason, and the penalty is death, and that's exactly how King George saw it. And so by signing, they were putting their lives literally on the line, as well as their fortunes and their reputation. We often hear these days the first part of the Declaration, the first and second paragraph, but at the time, the Declaration was most studied and reviewed and talked about for the middle part that I didn't read, which runs through all the things that King George had done to offend the colonies. I read the word necessary and of necessity in the parts that I read. That word in those times had a lot of religious overtones, and it gave people a sense that this was what Jefferson later called the manifest destiny kind of concept. It had a concept of God wanted it to be this way. And so when they talked about necessity, that was the only way they could justify the possibility of war. The Declaration really draws upon a concept of politics that is a contract. The contract is between the people to be governed and those doing the governing. And the idea is that the people agree to be governed, to be subject to laws, to be subject to taxes, to honor, respect, revere, and maintain the government, and the government's obligation is to maintain a common defense, is to implement laws that the people want to be, and to be fair and efficient and just in the carrying out of the government. And that's the whole premise of the Declaration of Independence, is that King George had broken the contract. He had not done his part. And that's why there's this long list of things that are wrong, and how they justified the people saying, we will no longer be governed because you didn't keep the contract. And that political philosophy was not new. Jefferson would not tell you that the things he had written in the Declaration of Independence were his ideas or were new ideas. He would probably tell you that he drew upon the ideas of John Locke and a lot of other philosophers and political theorists. But as a business lawyer, to me, it makes sense for them to say, hey, we had a deal. George, you didn't keep your end of the bargain, so we're going to leave. We're going to go form a government with somebody else who will. There are also a lot of biblical influences, and you can see that. I want to say something about the religious influence and the religious feelings of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. There were some active practicing religious people among them, but many of them were, while they were believers in God, they were not affiliated with a particular church. They were not necessarily at church every Sunday. There were a few ministers among the group, but by and large they were believers who were not practicing or were not Sunday churchgoers affiliated with a particular religion. There was an expectation that the United States would be a Christian nation, however, and that's easily found in many of the writings of the Founding Fathers and in the documents that support them. It actually wasn't until the 1960s when the Supreme Court started making decisions that pushed church out of government. Before that, the Declaration, the Constitution, all of those things were interpreted by the people who wrote them to mean that no particular denomination would become the state religion. But it was not opposed to the concept of God. And in fact, there are Supreme Court decisions that say, flat out, this is a Christian nation. It's in the Supreme Court's decision. I'm sure Brother Wiener will want to know the site. I'll give it to him afterward. All right, and then I want to bring some of the beliefs of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to the founders, to Jefferson, to the other signers of the Declaration, and to the document itself. It's apparent that the religious education of the signers of the Declaration continued after their deaths. I think that will be the case for most of us. In fact, there are some interesting things that I'm eager to learn about, but not in too big a hurry. In the last years of the 19th century, Wilford Woodruff was the president of the church, and he was in St. George, Utah, doing work where they had finished a temple. There was a functioning temple in St. George. And he was about to leave St. George. A couple weeks before he left, the signers of the Declaration of Independence came to him in the St. George Temple and asked, why hasn't the work been done for us? We provided the foundation of this nation. We never, and they used the word apostatized, according to President Woodruff, we never apostatized from it, and we have been faithful to God. Why hasn't the work been done for us? And President Woodruff's response was, wow, we never thought of that. We were looking at our own ancestors and trying to do the work, but we didn't think about you, brethren. And he says that they waited on him for 2 days and 2 nights. He got Brother McAllister and some of the other people who were there, and they started doing baptisms for the dead. They were first baptized for all the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and almost 40 other prominent men that totaled 100 in all. And then President Woodruff assigned those brethren to go do their endowments and to ordain them. I found some wry humor in President Wilford Woodruff's comment that they had done the work for all but 3 of the U.S. presidents, and these are his words, with reference to the other 3, he said, and when their cause is just, somebody will do the work for them. So I suppose that means there's still an opportunity to improve. To my knowledge, this is the only recorded incident of a group of individuals coming and asking after they had passed away for their temple work to be done. So the temple work was done for them. All of those men were ordained to be elders, and I found this interesting. 3 of them were ordained high priests: George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and Christopher Columbus. During my lifetime, President Kimball, as president of the church, sent Ezra Taft Benson to the vault where the records of the St. George Temple were stored to have a look and make sure that these things were there. And President Benson reported that they were in fact recorded on the records of the temple, and that it was a great thrill to him. Having served in the U.S. cabinet, I suppose Elder Benson was interested in governmental figures. The Lord has a lot to say about the rise and continued blessings of America. I'd suggest maybe over the weekend there are some places in the Scriptures you would take a look. There are some passages in section 101 of the Doctrine and Covenants, in Mosiah 29, in Ether 2, and other places. Those would be good reading today or for Sunday or for family home evening. And then I'd like to close my remarks with a quote from Thomas Jefferson. I've already pointed out that while he was a believer, he was not affiliated with a particular church or what we would think of as a practicing religious man. But when I've thought about taking a walk or a drive around Silicon Valley with a person like Thomas Jefferson, or specifically with Thomas Jefferson, after crying when I read about him dying, I think that this quote from Thomas Jefferson is very interesting. He said, "The genuine and simple words of Jesus will one day be restored, such as it was preached and practiced by himself. Very soon after his death, it became muffled up in mysteries and has been ever since kept in concealment from the vulgar eye. To penetrate and dissipate these clouds of darkness, the general mind must be strengthened by education." Perhaps President Wilford Woodruff could tell us what Jefferson has now learned, and if not, if Thomas Jefferson visits us at church tomorrow, we can help him with that education that will strengthen his mind about the genuine and simple words of Jesus. I am grateful for the founding fathers, the men and women who founded this nation, and for the others who have lived and fought, who have lived as examples, who have taught, who have worked, and made this a great country. And I'm grateful to be living here today. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.